My name is Leah Carter. I'm 27 years old, and I'd lived in Portland, Oregon my entire life. I'm usually the kind of person who avoids large crowds, but this year, my friends convinced me to join them for the New Year's Eve fireworks downtown. It was supposed to be a night of fun, just a celebration to leave behind the chaos of the past year. We arrived at the waterfront an hour before midnight, and the place was already packed. Music played loudly, and people were laughing, talking, and taking photos. I felt slightly out of place among the throngs of strangers, but my friends were having a great time, so I decided to relax and enjoy the atmosphere. As the countdown to midnight approached, the crowd pressed closer together. I was sandwiched between my friends and a sea of unfamiliar faces. It was exciting, but also a little overwhelming. That's when I first noticed him. I felt someone standing unusually close behind me. At first, I thought it was just the crowd, but this person wasn't moving or shifting like everyone else. He was just there. His presence made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I tried to ignore it, convincing myself I was being paranoid. When the countdown reached 10, everyone started shouting the numbers. I decided to turn around, just to reassure myself that it was nothing. As I glanced over my shoulder, I locked eyes with a man I didn't recognize. He was tall, maybe in his mid-30s, wearing a dark jacket and a scarf that covered part of his face. His eyes were piercing, and the smile he gave me wasn't friendly. It was chilling. He leaned in slightly and said, "See you soon." I froze. My brain scrambled to make sense of what had just happened. Before I could react, the fireworks exploded above us, lighting up the night sky. The crowd cheered, and in the chaos, I lost sight of him. My friends noticed something was off and asked if I was okay, but I brushed it off, not wanting to ruin the night. When the event ended, we walked back to our cars together. I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see the man following us, but the streets were crowded, and I couldn't be sure. My friends joked about how I seemed jumpy, but I laughed it off, pretending everything was fine. Inside, I felt uneasy. I got home around 1 a.m., double-checking that I had locked the door behind me. My apartment felt comforting, quiet, and familiar. I changed into my pajamas and collapsed on the couch, scrolling through my phone to distract myself. That's when it happened. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The message read, "Home safe yet?" My stomach dropped. I stared at the screen, hoping I was imagining it. I typed back, "Who is this?" But there was no reply. My hands were shaking as I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was someone I knew playing a prank, or maybe they had the wrong number. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. I called my best friend, Sarah, and told her what had happened. She insisted I call the police, and after a few minutes of hesitation, I did. An officer arrived at my apartment an hour later to take a report. They asked if I had noticed anyone suspicious earlier in the evening, and I told them about the man at the fireworks display. The officer assured me they would look into it, but there wasn't much they could do at that moment. I spent the rest of the night with every light in my apartment on, jumping at every little sound. My phone stayed silent, but the damage was done. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. The next day, the police called with an update. They had traced the number to a man named Eric Lambert. He had been arrested multiple times for stalking and harassment. My heart pounded as the officer explained that Eric had been released on bail just a few weeks prior. They advised me to change my locks and consider staying somewhere else for a while. I followed their advice immediately. A locksmith came that afternoon, and I stayed with Sarah for a few days. Even then, I felt like a prisoner of my own paranoia. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart would race. Every shadow outside the window looked like him. Eventually, I decided to move to a new apartment in a different part of the city. The process was exhausting, but I couldn't stay in a place where I felt so vulnerable. Even now, months later, I'm still haunted by that night. I've changed my number, installed security cameras, and taken self-defense classes, but the fear remains. What terrifies me the most is how easily he found me. I'll never forget his smile or the way he said, "See you soon." It's a reminder that sometimes the scariest monsters are the ones who blend in with the crowd, waiting for their chance to strike. My name is David. I'm 24 years old, and I live in a small but cozy apartment in downtown Chicago. This past New Year's Eve, I decided to host a party for my friends. I've always been the type to enjoy having people over. It feels safer than going out to crowded bars. Little did I know, this decision would lead to one of the most unsettling nights of my life. The evening started like any other party. My friends began arriving around 8 p.m., carrying bottles of wine and snacks. The vibe was perfect. Music playing, laughter filling the room, and the smell of pizza wafting from the kitchen. Around 10 p.m., the place was packed, and I noticed a guy I didn't recognize standing near the makeshift bar I'd set up. At first, I assumed he was a plus one of someone I invited. He was wearing a plain hoodie and jeans, blending in with everyone else. He even made small talk with a few of my friends, laughing and acting like he belonged. But something about him felt off. He was too quiet, his eyes darting around the room like he was scanning for something. I finally walked over and asked, "Hey, who are you here with?" He smiled, a little too casually, and said, "Oh, I'm friends with Josh." That seemed plausible since Josh was always bringing random people to parties. I didn't think much of it and went back to mingling. As the night went on, I started noticing little things. My roommate, Liam, came up to me and asked if I'd seen his phone. He swore he'd left it on the counter, but it was nowhere to be found. Then Sarah, one of my close friends, said her wallet was missing from her bag. At first, I thought it was just the chaos of the party, things getting misplaced in the crowd. But then I saw the guy again. He was slipping out of the living room and heading toward the hallway where the bedrooms were. My stomach dropped. I quietly followed him, staying far enough back that he wouldn't notice me. When he turned into my bedroom, I felt a surge of anger. I pushed the door open and found him rifling through my nightstand. "What the hell are you doing?" I snapped. His face went pale, and for a split second, he froze. Then he bolted past me, shoving me into the wall. The party came to a screeching halt as everyone turned to see the guy sprinting out the front door. I yelled, "Call the cops," and chased after him, but he was too fast. By the time I got to the street, he had disappeared into the crowd. The police arrived about 15 minutes later. I explained what had happened, describing the guy as best as I could. They asked me to make a list of the missing items while they searched the area. It wasn't just Liam's phone and Sarah's wallet. A few other guests had their things stolen too. AirPods, a watch, even a couple of credit cards. About an hour later, the cops came back with good news. They had found the guy a few blocks away, trying to sell some of the stolen items to a street vendor. When they searched him, they found a bag full of everything he'd taken from the party. What really shook me was what they told me next. This wasn't the first time he'd done something like this. The guy was a professional thief who specialized in crashing parties, blending in and robbing people. He had a long record of breaking into homes, stealing valuables, and even stalking his victims afterward. The police assured me he wouldn't be getting out anytime soon, but I couldn't shake the feeling of how easily he'd gotten into my home. He walked in like he belonged, and no one questioned it, not even me. That night, after everyone had left and the place was quiet again, I sat in my living room, replaying everything in my head. I couldn't sleep. Every little noise made me jump, and I kept double-checking that the doors were locked. The thought that a complete stranger had been in my space, going through my things and stealing from my friends, made me feel violated in a way I'd never experienced before. Since that night, I've been a lot more cautious. I never leave my doors unlocked during parties, and I keep a close eye on who comes in and out. But even now, every New Year's Eve, I think about that guy and how easily he could have done something far worse. Ready to feel a chill run down your spine? Join us in the shadows and dive into the world of terrifying tales and creepy encounters. Subscribe now to Shivers in the Dark and hit the bell so you never miss a story that keeps you up at night. My name is Rachel, and I'm 22 years old. I live in Denver, Colorado, and I've always been a fan of live music. This past New Year's Eve, I decided to go to a huge outdoor concert downtown with my friends. It was supposed to be a night of celebration, dancing, and counting down to midnight under the city lights. But what started as an exciting evening turned into a nightmare that still haunts me. The concert was packed. Thousands of people filled the square, laughing, singing along to the music, and sipping on overpriced drinks. My friends and I managed to find a spot near the middle of the crowd. The energy was electric, and for the first hour, I felt like nothing could ruin the night. The music, the lights, and the atmosphere created a perfect celebration that felt magical in every way. That's when I noticed him. A man standing a few feet away from me, wearing a dark jacket and a baseball cap pulled low over his face. He wasn't singing or dancing like everyone else. Instead, he stood still, clutching his phone tightly and whispering into it. His eyes darted around the crowd, scanning everyone like he was looking for someone or something. At first, I tried to ignore it. Maybe he was just awkward or waiting for a friend, but the longer I watched him, the more uneasy I felt. He kept shifting his weight nervously, glancing at his bag on the ground next to him. Every so often, he'd pick it up, adjust it, and put it back down. I nudged my friend Clara and pointed him out. "That guy's acting weird," I whispered. Clara shrugged, saying, "He's probably just drunk or something. Don't overthink it." But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. My heart started racing, and I couldn't focus on the music anymore. The man seemed too deliberate, too out of place. Every time the crowd cheered or the bass dropped, he didn't react. Instead, his focus seemed to intensify, and the way he kept glancing at his bag sent chills down my spine. I decided I couldn't ignore it. Something about him made my instincts scream. I made my way through the crowd toward one of the security guards stationed near the edge of the venue. I explained what I'd seen, trying not to sound like I was overreacting. The guard nodded and said they'd check it out. A few minutes later, I saw two guards approach the man. They asked him some questions, and he looked annoyed but cooperative. Then they pointed to his bag. He hesitated before handing it over. One of the guards unzipped it, and I watched as their expressions changed. The guards quickly escorted the man out of the crowd, and I saw one of them speaking into a radio. My stomach dropped. Something was seriously wrong. My friends, noticing the commotion, rushed over to me, asking what was happening. I didn't have the words to explain, but I knew this wasn't just a misunderstanding. Not long after, a police officer approached me. He asked if I'd been the one to report the man. I nodded, my hands shaking. The officer thanked me and explained that the man had been carrying a weapon and detailed notes about the concert layout, including times and locations. It was clear he'd been planning something terrible. I felt a mix of relief and terror. Relief that he'd been caught, but terror at how close we all came to disaster. If I hadn't said something, who knows what could have happened. I kept thinking about how easy it would have been for him to blend in with the crowd and how dangerous his intentions had been. The concert continued, and my friends tried to cheer me up, saying I'd done the right thing. They even suggested we get more drinks to help calm my nerves, but I couldn't enjoy the rest of the night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the man's face, the way he'd scanned the crowd like a predator. Even now, months later, I still think about that night, about how easily he blended into the crowd, how no one else seemed to notice him. I've become more cautious since then, always scanning my surroundings whenever I'm in a public space. I've realized that our sense of safety can be so fragile, shattered in an instant by someone with dark intentions. That New Year's Eve was supposed to be a night of celebration. But for me, it was a chilling reminder that evil can be hiding in plain sight. I don't regret speaking up, even though it terrified me. It's better to trust your instincts, no matter how paranoid they might seem.